Tancam scrambled frantically through the cluttered corners of her house, her fingers trembling as she overturned cushions and papers in a desperate search for Kha Luong's business card. Finally, her eyes caught a glimpse of it, wedged deep within the crevices of the sofa. It is true what they say: when one is drowning in illness or despair, they will pray to any god and seek any cure. Once the call connected, her throat constricted with terror, she could only manage to choke out two simple syllables, Kha Luong, from the other end of the line. A high-pitched, almost unnatural voice slithered through the speaker. "Little kitten, you have finally called me. Now you believe that I am not afraid of cats, don't you?" She felt a cold wave of uncertainty wash over her as she listened to him. Could she truly trust this man? Was it possible that he actually belonged to a lineage of sorcerers with a long-standing tradition of hunting ghosts? It seemed her situation was truly dire this time. A short while later, he arrived at her house. As soon as she heard the sharp ring of the doorbell, she ran to open the door. Standing outside was a rather handsome man wearing dark, imposing sunglasses that gave him a formidable air. He was dressed in a black suit so meticulously pressed that the creases looked sharp enough to cut, and he carried a large, heavy bag in his hand. Tancam could only shake her head in disbelief as she stepped aside to let him in. "I invited you here to exorcise a ghost not to put on a performance as a member of the underworld," she said, her voice laced with exhaustion. "There was no need for you to be so flamboyant." As he slid his sunglasses down, he began to explain himself with a smirk. "Hunting ghosts is just my amateur hobby. My primary profession is simply being a handsome man." She thought to herself, unable to comprehend what kind of person could be so utterly shameless and vain. Although her anger had not yet subsided, she still opened the refrigerator and pulled out a can of Coca-Cola to offer him. She sat cross-legged on the sofa and began to recount in meticulous and harrowing detail every bizarre and terrifying event that had occurred over the past few days. She started from the moment Thi returned and invited every one over to play, then moved to the red fabric that Thi had taken to sew in't a cerngsome dress. She spoke of the gruesome death of Lamki, how Anki had descended in't a state of madness, and how Doong Thi was currently being puppeteered by a malevolent spirit. Finally, she confessed her own growing sense of mortal peril. Kha Luong listened with intense focus, his playful demeanor replaced by a heavy silence. Not betraying his reputation as a hereditary sorcerer, he began to dissect the problem with clinical precision. "When exactly did you start feeling that things were wrong?" he asked. "It is very difficult to pinpoint a specific moment," she replied, her voice low. "But ever since Thi returned, I have felt that nothing is normal. Every event that followed has been increasingly strange and unsettling." "To tell you the truth," he said, his eyes narrowing, "I find it quite simple. I believe everything is connected to that piece of red cloth." Tancam thought to herself that she, of course, already knew the red fabric was the source of the evil. Such a simple deduction could be made by anyone who had glanced through a few detective novels. From the moment she had seen the spectral syll, yet clinging to Thi's shoulders through the eyes of Hak Bao, she knew that the cloth was anything but ordinary. Her mind drifted back to the old Womanth mother of Mr. Hawo, had adamantly forbidden her son from ever designing anything using that cloth. She thought of the chain of tragedies that had erupted from the moment everyone began wearing garments made from that crimson silk. She herself had not yet encountered a life-threatening incident, only because she had not yet wrapped the red scarf around her own neck. The urgent matter at hand was how to save Thi, and how to banish that vengeful female ghost. Tan Cam couldn't help but jab at Kha Luong. Anyone with a bit of intelligence could deduce what you just said. Don't think we are all fools. Who didn't know this already, did you come here just to show off and put on a show? Kha Luong ignored her sarcasm entirely. He spoke with sudden gravity. Anything we say now is meaningless. We must get to your friend's house immediately. She may be facing an immediate and terrible danger. She quickly scooped up Hak Bao in her arms. Kha Luong began to run as if he were flying, shouting as he went, "Why are you bringing that cat? I am deathly allergic to them." "You must take him," she insisted. "This cat is miraculous. He has saved my life many times already. I'm not touching it. I have allergies." "You carry him yourself," he barked back. Kha Luong led her to a strikingly beautiful and expensive car parked outside. "Kha Luong, where did you steal this car from?" she asked suspiciously. "I didn't steal it. It's mine," he replied. This guy probably just borrowed friend's car to show off with his personality he'd be lucky to own," Bisikosh thought to herself. In no time at all they arrived at Doong Thi, this house. Tan Cam and Kha Luong rushed to press the doorbell. A female maid opened the door for them. The maid's face was calm and indifferent, which gave Tan Cam a small sense of relief. She reasoned that if something terrible had happened to Thi, the maid would not be so composed. However, the words the maid spoke next left them paralyzed with dread. "The mistress left the house half an hour ago," the maid said. She answered the phone and then departed immediately. "Who called Thi?" Tan Cam asked, her heart racing. It was the voice of an old man. "He asked me to call the mistress to the phone after she finished listening to him. She left at once." Tan Cam and Kha Luong sat in the living room, waiting for Thi. They had no idea why she would go out at such an hour. Suddenly, as if struck by a chilling realization, Tan Cam turned to the maid and asked what was she wearing when she went out. The mistress was still wearing the red sarngsam. She refused to take it off, the maid replied. Upon hearing this answer, Tan Cam's strength vanished and she collapsed on the threshold of the house. If Thi was still wearing that cursed garment, she was undoubtedly in extreme danger. She knew she had to call the police immediately. When she called Look to Min, he was busy examining a collection of photographs, trying to find some hidden clue within the details of Lam Ki's suicide. Hearing her choked sobs over the phone, his heart twisted with a sharp, agonizing pain, he decided to go to Doong Thi, this house, at once. Tan Cam met him at the door, and together with Kha Luong, they began to speak rapidly. Their voices overlapping as they told him about Thi carrying a ghost on her back and how she had now vanished. After hearing her story, Look to Min reacted very differently than Kha Luong. He did not jump to conclusions about cursed fabrics or supernatural causes. Instead, he reached out, grabbed her hand, and pulled her toward the door. "Where are you planning to take me?" she asked, startled to see a psychiatrist, he said firmly. "Perhaps you have been under too much pressure and are beginning to suffer from hallucinations." Suddenly, she felt a cold clarity wash over her. She realized that this man she cared for, did not believe a single word she said. He was a normal man, a man who had spent years in rigorous study, just like her, and he was a police officer. How could a person like that ever believe in the existence of ghosts speaking of these things to him? Would only bring her more pain and trouble. Realizing this, she forced herself to calm down. You don't believe her, Kha Luong said to two men on her behalf, his voice challenging. Only then did Look Two Men realize that he had handled the situation poorly. He knew he should have offered words of encouragement to the girl who had placed her trust in him. But he could not be blamed entirely. He was a man of cold logic, not easily swayed by emotion or superstition. The expression on Tan Cam's face was devastating to behold. She bit her lip hard, her eyes blinking, as if trying to shield herself from the hurt. Perhaps the things she said were true, but the entire situation was simply too bizarre, too impossible to believe. Regardless of his skepticism, two men would not abandon the case. Deep down, even he began to believe that there was someone behind all of this, someone intentionally weaving this web of spreading fear. He couldn't help but wonder if that person might actually be the missing girl, Doong Thi Thi herself. Tan Cam was determined to find Doong Thi Thi, but the problem lay in the sheer, overwhelming vastness of this city. Where could she possibly begin her search in this urban labyrinth? Waiting in the living room all day, only Kha Luong seemed truly at ease. He spent his time scrutinizing every corner of the house with a restless, wandering curiosity. At one point, the black cat perched on the sofa hissed, and chased him away shortly after he pulled a sleek laptop from his bag. So you belong to the generation of digital age sorcerers, do you? Tan Cam remarked with biting sarcasm as she watched him open the computer to play video games. I'm playing these games to hone my ghost hunting skills, he replied without looking up, his fingers dancing across the keys. Something is seriously wrong with him. Playing video games to practice catching ghosts, Tan Cam thought to herself, her mind filled with weary skepticism. As evening descended into a heavy gloom Look Two Men finally pulled out his phone and barked orders to his subordinate. It's to begin the search for Doong Thi Thi. He was knowingly violating protocol. At that point in time, not enough hours had passed to officially classify her as a missing person. His heart hammered with a growing sense of panic. Sitting inside Doong Thi, this home, he felt an oppressive supernatural chill. It felt as though an invisible presence was exhaling, a frigid, spectral breath against the nape of his neck. The calls had been made, and the search parties had begun their work, yet news of Doong Thi Thi remained buried in a void of silence. There was no trace of her anywhere. Exhaustion eventually claimed Tan Cam, and she drifted into a fitful sleep on the sofa. Kha Luong, having finished his dinner, reclined his body on another couch and closed his eyes. Look Two Men watched the two of them slipping soundly. Most striking of all was the moment Tan Cam fell into slumber. Hak Bao immediately leaped up and curled against her thigh, providing a strange sense of warmth. Look Two Men could not hold out much longer against his own fatigue. A short while later, he leaned back against the sofa and fell into a deep sleep. In the dead of night, in the middle of that thick silence, Tan Cam was jolted awake by the shrill, persistent ringing of a telephone. Tan Cam reached out her hand to grab the phone. All she heard on the other end was a chorus of laughter. In the stillness of the night, that crisp, rhythmic laughter made her skin crawl with intense goosebumps. It was the laughter of a crowd of people. The sound was gentle and softening, like the high-pitched shrieks or the guttural echoing cries of "Give me back, my life," often heard from the hanging ghosts in horror films. Yet this subtle sound filled Tan Cam with a soul-crushing terror among the voices. was a husky, rasping laugh that Tan Cam recognized instantly. Yes, it was the unmistakable laugh of Doong Thi Thi. She remembered how Doong Thi Thi would laugh with such delight whenever she successfully teased or bullied her. Then came a stifled small giggle that was definitely look An Ki Shi always had the habit of covering her mouth when she laughed. No matter how joyous or hilarious the situation, she only ever laughed in that restrained way, never letting out a loud sound. And that sharp, vibrant, and joyful laugh belonged to Lam Ki without a doubt. Only she possessed such a carefree and happy laugh. Once she started, she would laugh with total abandon. Tan Cam used to tease her, saying her laugh sounded like the innocent, silly celebration of a hen that had just finished laying an egg. Those laughs struck terror into her very core. They were laughing so happily tog, either through moment, wo living and one dead. Suddenly she heard a soft, ethereal voice calling her name, a voice she had never heard before in her life. Tan Cam extreme fear stripped away her reason, and suddenly she found that mysterious voice to be hauntingly familiar and incredibly beautiful to hear. Her vision began to blur and grow hazy. She-ha Idly clutched the phone in an instant. The scenery around her shifted violently. Before her eyes stood a dense, dark forest. Strangely, look, 2 men and Kha Luong were nowhere to be seen. The voice felt very close to her now. This mountain path was one she had walked before, without much effort. She found a small, narrow trail. The voice was emanating from right here. She only needed to follow this path up the mountain to reach its source. She took one step after another, following the lure of that voice. It was so close now, so tender and melodious. When it whispered her name, the sound was utterly bewitching and hypnotic. She drew closer and closer. Listening intently, she realized it was the voice of a woman. The woman was summoning her. Tan Cam, come here. Quickly, Tan Cam walked straight toward the sound. Before her stood an ancient gnarled tree, its leaves rustling like dry parchment in the wind. The moonlight was so unnaturally bright it made her soul tremble with fear. Just as Tan Cam was about to step into the darkness beneath the tree, a piercing, agonizing cat's shriek tore through the air. She felt a sharp, stinging pain across her face, and she collapsed onto the ground. She snapped her eyes open. The forest vanished, and the scenery once again transformed back into Doong Thi. This house, Kha Luong, and look, 2 men were standing right beside her. She had walked all the way to the very edge of the roof-top balcony. Below her lay the pitch-black courtyard. She saw the rows of jagged, unfinished iron fence spikes, gleaming in the dark like the fangs of a pack of wolves, waiting for her to fall so they could impale and devour her. Regaining her composure, she saw Hak Bao staring at her with glowing eyes. Her face throbbed with a sharp pain. She touched it and realized she was bleeding from a scratch. Kha Luong stood there, his hands moving incessantly as he scribbled notes, drawing talismans and chanting incantations under his breath. He said nothing to her, but she could feel a sense of comfort and protection radiating from him. After a long, heavy silence, Tan Cam began to tremble. She slowly spoke each word, her voice shaking. I heard the laughter of Doong Thi Thi, and look, An Ki, they are there with Lam Ki. Kha Luong stepped down from the edge of the balcony and immediately asked, Is Lam Ki the friend who is already dead? That's right, look, 2 men snapped. He did not like Kha Luong at all. A man's right. Wishin told him that the background of this man, who acted like he could command spirits, was not clear or trustworthy in the slightest. Kha Luong had one virtue: he never paid any attention to the expressions or moods of those around him. He turned back to Tan Cam and asked seriously, "Through the phone you heard the laughter of ghosts, didn't you? That is truly fascinating. It is a pity that we didn't hear the telephone ring at all." Tan Cam looked in, his large wide eyes, her heart churning with pure confusion and dread. The three of them sat together, each lost in their own dark thoughts. None of them dared to fall asleep again, for they were terrified that they would hear the ring of that mysterious, ghostly telephone once more. That horrific phone call had nearly succeeded in claiming Tan Cam's life. The long night eventually bled into the morning. The new day was not particularly bright or sunny, but there was just enough light to offer a small, fragile sense of peace to their frayed and frightened hearts.